Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Rowe, and welcome to our conversation with two legends of the air from World War II and beyond, presented by the American Veterans Center and the United States of America, World War II 75th Commemoration. We are honored today, not just honored, flattered, speaking only for myself, humbled to be in the presence of two great American heroes. We have with us Lieutenant Colonel James H. Harvey III, Tuskegee Airman, Korean War combat pilot, and winner of the first Top Gun competition, and Colonel Joe Peterburs, ace pilot of World War II, who went on to serve 36 years in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Gentlemen, what an honor to meet you. And we are celebrating the 75th commemoration of the end of the war. And I guess, Lieutenant Colonel, I'll just start with you. Was there ever a moment 75 years ago when you imagined you would be sitting down today to do a Zoom call in 2020 to talk about all that you had seen in those remarkable days?
Never. Never heard of the word Zoom until a couple weeks ago. Where I'm from.
And you are from Denver originally, is that right?
No, I was born in Montclair, New Jersey.
Well, what are you doing in Colorado?
Oscar Mayer sent me here.
Oscar Mayer? Like Oscar Mayer wieners?
Say again.
Oscar Mayer wieners, the hot dogs?
That's the one. See, I retired in Madison, Wisconsin. And at that time, that was the home office for Oscar Mayer. That's when it was still owned by the Mayer family.
Well, it just goes to show you, as you guys used to say in the Army, I think, prior planning prevents poor performance. And here I am with all the information I can find on Lieutenant Colonel James Harvey, and nowhere does it say you're an ambassador for the great American hot dog.
That's top secret.
Is it? Because if we're going to talk about hot dogs, we got to talk about Top Gun. Because here you are, the first, I don't even think they called it Top Gun back then. But
well, in the book that the Air Force put out back then, they mentioned Top Gun in the article. And because the Navy was upset that we were used Top Gun, but they used that term in the book. Top
and
Gun.
So you didn't know at the time that you were competing in a Top Gun competition. You just knew that, you know, the Tuskegee branch, more or less, as I understand it, was kind of shut down, but then reinvigorated, and suddenly you're in the midst of a competition.
As you know, the Air Force came about in 47, the United States Air Force. Well, then in 49, they held their first ever Top Gun weapons meet. And all the fighter groups in the United States got an invitation to participate and enter 3 primary pilots and 1 alternate pilot as to represent their group at the shoot-off in May of 1949.
Hey, what's going on here?
Las Vegas Air Force Base, which is now Nellis.
Colonel Peterburs, did you have a question? Can you hear me okay?
No. My screen just went blank and something jumped on it. I got rid of it.
Well, I mean, I think that's indicative of the times we live in and the times that you served in. Every so often, right in the middle of a mission, your screen goes blank.
Yeah.
And you've got to figure it out.
Right.
As it goes.
Things haven't changed much.
Look, I should just tell the viewer right now that I'm kind of making this up as I go, and I am a little starstruck. Both of you gentlemen have told your stories so many times over the last 75 years, and I do want to hear the stories again. I also want the opportunity to bring in, we've got half a dozen or so military students who are going to want to ask you some questions too in the course of this conversation. So now we're all more or less on the same page. And Lieutenant Colonel, you were just telling me that the business of competing back then, 75 years ago, had to be a very unusual experience for you. Among other things, you were the first black soldier, black airman to fly a jet. Is that correct as well?
That's correct.
So the article that I read walks you through what that competition was like. But of course, the story that everybody wants to hear has to do with the trophy that somehow went missing
yes.
for 46 or 47 years, which honestly, I don't understand, because I'm looking through my notes here, and this trophy's 3 feet tall.
Right.
How do you lose a 3-foot trophy?
Well, it was conveniently misplaced. It was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base Museum storage area. We had a lady in Atlanta, she's an historian, and she made it her mission to find it, and she found it in 5 days at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base Museum storage area. So she went to Wright-Pat, saw the trophy, and she said, "Why isn't this on display?" He said, "We get a lot of items in, we can't display everything, and this item will never be on display." Well, it is on display.
What was the issue? I mean, is this just a normal military screw up, or was there something happening back then, obviously, between the races? You must have dealt with all kinds of issues 75 years ago.
Same old, same old.
So to sum up, the winner of the first Top Gun competition was awarded a trophy. The trophy wasn't displayed and then magically vanished for 47 years?
55 years.
But who's counting?
We were not recognized as the winner for 46 years, and we had to submit the paperwork to get it corrected.
Just incredible. Colonel Peterburs, I'm going to come to you in just a second, but as long as I've got you, Lieutenant Colonel, I want to read something I saw here on your Wikipedia page. In 1950, you became the first African-American jet pilot in combat flying in the Korean War, decorated with the Distinguished Flying Cross for actions on October 16th, 1950. Sorry. What happened on October 16th, 1950?
We had taken off from Japan, heading up into North Korea on a bombing and strafing mission. Pardon me. We dropped our bombs and we're heading back. We still had all of our 50 calibers. And we got a call about some troops that were pinned down in the mountains, and they asked if we could help. So I told them, yes, I could help, no problem. So it was mountainous area, so I found a way down below the clouds in the mountains, found the target area. They directed us as to where the target area was. We emptied our 50 caliber machine guns in that area and then headed back to Japan. A couple weeks later, we got a message from the commander, a telegram, and he said the 4 of us had killed 1,500 of the enemy.
Extraordinary.
The aircraft and the muzzle velocity of the bullets, and one bullet can do a lot of damage.
Do you recall the feeling you had when you learned just how effective that raid had been?
I felt good about it, yes. That was our mission, to get rid of the enemy over there, but made me feel good.
And how do you feel today, 75 years later?
Same, fine. I don't think about it, but I feel fine.
I'm glad. Now, Colonel Peterburs, there you are, not too far from me, actually, up in Northern California.
That's correct.
How's life treating you these days?
Oh, great, great. Good. Of course, sort of a little tired of this being cooped up, hibernating during this thing that's going on, this virus. But I used to go to a lot of air shows and did a lot of traveling. And now I'm working. I'm completing projects that I set aside years ago. So I mean, I'm keeping busy anyway.
I'm glad. Well, since you brought it up, you know, I think a lot of people who are watching this right now are feeling the same way. I've been hunkered in this bunker since early March, and you, of course, spent a lot of your life in a fairly confined space, you know, traveling around at the speed of sound or something close to it. Are we living through a truly extraordinary time, or can you talk about this day and age as a guy who flew, what, 50 combat missions, and maybe give us some perspective?
Actually, I feel I'm living in a different universe, because, and the significance of the virus to me, you know, isn't that much difference than some. I went through. I was born prior to the Great Depression, went through the Great Depression, and then of course World War II and the Cold War, and there were many things that the ordinary citizen was exposed to, but we didn't take it as serious as we are taking the virus. I mean, I'm not trying to reduce but you know, a life is a series of challenges, and this is just another challenge as far as I'm concerned.
Sure. You know, I talked to a guy a couple of weeks ago about your age, and he made the same point. You know, he lived through the Depression, and of course he was very young at the time. He said something that really surprised me. He said, looking back at it, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And there were other people in the room his age who agreed. And I was kind of taken aback, because it's hard to imagine looking back at the pandemic of 2020 as a good thing. But it does clarify things, doesn't it? It does force people to come to terms with who they are and what matters most.
It forms your, you know, the difficulties you face form your personality, your beliefs, and loyalties. You rely on people, and you know, facing difficulties and challenges is probably one of the best things for building character. So,
right.
I'm not. Go ahead.
Well, look, if we're going to talk about building character, then we have to talk about adversity. And if we're going to talk about adversity, we have to talk briefly, at least, about, I think it was your 49th mission. That was the one where you were shot down?
That's correct.
I know you've told the story 1,000 times, but give me the short version one more time, because it's a good one.
Okay, it was on the 10th of April of 1945, and I was, and our group was escorting some 400 and plus B-17s. There were 400 and some of us fighters, P-51s, escorting them to targets in at Oranienburg, which is just north of Berlin. And it was a normal mission up until the time the bombers let go their loads on the target. We were hit by a swarm of ME-262 turbojets. I was flying high cover, about 5,000 feet above the bombers, and I saw the 262 start pulling into a bomber, and I immediately rolled over and started down at him. He blew up that bomber, and by the time I got down to within firing range, he just blew up another B-17, and I got into his 6 o'clock position and fired a few rounds, and got him in the left engine and saw some smoke and so on. And then he rolled over into a turn and started down to the deck, and I chased him down to about 5,000 feet, and he disappeared into a cloud layer. Well, I wasn't going to chase him anymore. That was it. And so I looked over to my left, and I saw an airfield full of aircraft, enemy aircraft. So I started strafing and blew up 5 on the ground and set a hangar on fire. And on my probably 4th too many passes, I came in on a FW-200, a 400 Condor, one of Hitler's fleet. And as I was coming in, I felt the thud, and blew the 200 up, and then as I was coming off target, I got another thud and started up, pulled up, said smoke and oil coming over my air screen. I got up to 10,000 feet, was able to make it back to Berg, and it was about down to 1,000 feet when I got to Berg, which is just sort of a suburb of Magdeburg. And I was down to 1,000 feet, and I look over to my 30 o'clock position, and there's a FW-200 coming at me. And I was able to maneuver my aircraft. I pulled into him, and he missed. He fired the rockets and stuff, missed, fortunately. And by that time, I was down to about 500 feet, and I thought I was too low to bail out, but so I was looking for a place to belly land, but I had already strapped, ready to bail out before the FW-200 hit. So anyway, I bailed out at about 300 feet, hit the tail, landed, and was captured. And the rest is another great adventure. I was a POW. I did a march from the Berg back to Berlin. I escaped. I got with a Russian tank unit, and I fought with them from Berlin to the Battle of Wittenberg on the Elbe. And there I was picked up by an Army patrol. The Russians didn't want to let me go, but I talked to the sergeant that was running the American patrol. I was insistent. So I came back with them, and then I spent with a couple of days with the Army, and I took off by myself again, and then ran into a C-47 in the field, and hopped a ride on it, got back to Paris, and then eventually made my way home and got married. My fiance, who I named my aircraft after, Josephine.
Josephine.
And when I got married, I had to get my mom's permission because I hadn't turned 20.
All right, hold on. You're 19. You're flying your 49.
I was 20 by then. I was 19 when I went over my first time, but I turned 20 in.
When you proposed. Yeah, I'll get there. But if I'm going to recap and do my version of the story, you're a 19-year-old kid flying your 49th mission. You're chasing. You don't know who you're chasing at the time, this guy that you shot down. Tell me his name again.
It's Walter Schuck, Oberleutnant Walter Schuck, Knight's Cross with oak leaves, 500 missions, 206 aerial victories.
I'm sorry. I mean, this is so bananas. You're 19 years old. You're chasing Schuck. You don't know it's him. You shoot him down. You basically fly around. Now you're by yourself, and you look down and you see a field full of planes, enemy planes.
Yeah.
You destroy them. You light the hangar up. Then you basically crash land. You're taken prisoner. Then you join up with the Russian contingent, fight with them for 3 days, and then...
No, it was about 7 days.
And they loved you so much, they didn't want to give you back, but you got hooked up with the Americans, and then you went back. And here, I just got to ask you one other thing real quick, Colonel. Assigned to Vietnam, so I'm jumping ahead, 20-some years. An enemy 122 millimeter rocket landed in your room while you were sleeping during the Tet Offensive. What are you doing here? A rocket lands in your room?
Not in my room. It was right outside of my room. I was in a barracks.
It says right here, it's in your room.
I know. You know, you don't get to edit some of these things. But anyway, it was not in my room. It was right outside the barracks. Blew the barracks apart. I'm sleeping, and fortunately, I didn't. The bullet was faster than the sound because I was a piece of shrapnel. Because if I would have lifted my head up 2 seconds earlier, I would have had a piece of shrapnel right through my forehead. Because right above my bed, there was a chunk of shrapnel embedded in the wall.
Okay, so I'm gonna take some questions from some of our military students in a minute, but Lieutenant Colonel Harvey, I just want to come back to you real quick because what I just heard really was the story of a near miss. And when I look back at your careers, I'm curious to know if the whole notion of a near miss is the thing that's kind of defined your life. So many missions, so many close calls, day after day after day, where it all could have been the last, and yet here you guys are still standing. Do you still think about the near misses in your life, sir?
Occasionally I do. And I just say, well, the good Lord was looking out after me.
He sure was.
Yes,
And
he was.
it certainly seems like he still is. Like I said, we've got half a dozen students with us. I want to go to Cadet 2C Colton LAYMAN out there at the Air Force Academy. Who's your question for, and what is the question?
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Rowe, for the introduction, and thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. This question's a little bit for both of you. So reading through your bios, the thing that struck me was how both of you were pioneers and trailblazers from propeller planes to jet planes. I was wondering what it was like to be that front runner of helping the Air Force come into this jet age, and if you ever tinkered with your aircraft or were improvising on the spot, and how that kind of affected the rest of your life and your outlook.
I'm a very serious hearing problem, and I didn't understand what he was saying. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Basically, the question was, what does it mean to you today to have been the first to do what you did? Does it matter to you?
No, it doesn't matter. No, I'm just doing my job. I was given a chance, and I took advantage of it and did my best. That's all we could do.
Colonel Peterburs, I mean, that, in a way, I'm not surprised to hear him say that, because so many of your generation, it's what you do. You shrug and you say, how's the job? And so we did it. Is that a fair generalization?
That's exactly correct. You know, and as far as being the first, you don't know you're the first when it's happening. You see, that all comes later. In fact, like shooting down Walter Schuck, I didn't even know that I damaged his aircraft serious enough that he had to bail out. But I found out 60 years later. I never put in the claim form. It didn't make any difference to me. All I was doing is my job, and I ensured that he didn't blow up another B-17. That made me. But you got to remember, when you're 20 years old or 21, you're going to live forever. And these things don't. I used to tell Walter Schuck that we were on air shows together. We became very close friends. And he was 4 years older than I. And I said, Walter, I said, when we were young and full of, you know what, and vinegar, and we were going to live forever. And I'm afraid we're going to.
Careful what you wish for.
We were both 90 in our 90s at the time. So.
That's amazing. Well, you just kind of glossed over something that's sort of extraordinary. The ace that you shot down 77 years ago or whatever it was became your friend. How did that happen?
Well, it was through a series. After the war, all the researchers and the historians were trying to find out who shot down Walter Schuck. And they never did find it until about 1997. The first inkling that I was the one that shot him down came about. It was, it's a long series of, believe it or not, incidents that happened that led them to me, and then me to Walter. And then it became Swedish historian was writing Walter's biography, and he had heard about my story, and he knew that I had written up a summary of my mission. He asked me to send it to him, and he came back. He said, 100% sure you shot down Walter Schuck. I said, how can you do that? He said, when you said that you saw him shoot down 2 B-17s in a row, and Walter Schuck was on that mission, and Walter Schuck never did that. So it had to be me. And besides that, all the stories.
So,
One-sided, so.
I mean, but what was it like to come face to face with the man who you were doing your level best to kill?
Well, he was, you know, it just, you know, you meet people and you have contacts, and some people you immediately, I don't know if it's because we were both fighter pilots and we both experienced similar types of things. We just immediately became friends, and he became part of our family. My 2 great-granddaughters called him Papa Walter, and we went on all sorts of nice things together. And he was a real gentle man, even though he was called the Knight of the North. They did most of his flying up in the Eismeer, the North Sea area. Anyway, we became really great friends.
Well,
when he passed away.
It's just nothing short of extraordinary. I don't know what Hollywood is waiting for. You know, somebody better call you quick. There's a movie
May
to
I
be
say
made.
something here?
Of course. Yes, sir.
Fighter pilots aren't out to kill the pilot. They're out to shoot the airplane down. And if the pilot gets out, that's fine. Let him come up again, I'll shoot him down again. But we're not out to kill the pilot.
May I ask you when that distinction was made clear to you on a personal level?
It wasn't. It's just something I learned.
Was there a particular incident or a particular
No.
time? It's
No.
just, you just knew it.
Just knew it.
I'm just letting it sink in, because obviously I wonder if it translates into other parts of this. I mean, does a Marine think the same way?
No. No. On the ground, it's kill or be killed. And he's right there in front of your face, so you better get to him. Because if you don't, he's going to get you. But in an airplane, it's different. You shoot the airplane down, he has a choice of jumping out or staying in the aircraft. If he was hit by a bullet in the aircraft, well, chances are he's not going to get out. But if he gets out, that's okay.
That's such a remarkable distinction for me. Colonel Peterburs, when you were landing, you were describing earlier, you're coming in, you're at 1,000, you're at 500, you're at 300. You've got to be running this calculus the whole time. Do you bail out, or do you take it all the way down? How do you decide?
It all happens, you know, the thought process is milliseconds from the time, because I was going to bail out prior to the FW-190, so I unstrapped, okay, to get out. Then that action happened, and by that time, after he made us pass and stuff, I was down to 500 feet. And I'm thinking, it's too low to bail out. I gotta belly this thing in. And then I think, well, I've unstrapped myself. I'll kill myself if I try to belly this aircraft in without being strapped in, right? So I decided to bail out. And then I went over the side. And when I went over the side, I thought, damn it, my mother is going to get a telegram about this. And that's what went through my mind. And I landed and very hard, and was going to be a lot more.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to go to another question in 1 second, but Lieutenant Colonel, picking up on what he said, when you try and determine what to do in a situation like that, are you going through the options one step at a time? In other words, are you really thinking about the specifics of what you'll do, or are you just reacting in a more general way, if that makes sense?
You're reacting because you've already thought about it. So when the situation arises, you already have the answer. So you take care of it.
Terrific. I am going now to our second question from Cadet Troy Henrickson, who's down at Bowling Green State University. Troy, you hear me okay?
Yes, Mr. Rowe, can you hear me okay?
It's Mr. Mike Rowe, Troy. I think I've earned it.
My apologies, sir. Thank you so much for the introduction. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. The question I had is, your military time had a lot of challenges, and I want to know what characteristics or personality traits that you personally feel like helped you the most through all your challenges.
Lieutenant Colonel Harvey, what personality traits have helped you become the man you are?
Well, I've always been a perfectionist up until the time I got married. Knock it off. But as a perfectionist, you can do anything. So I had no problems whatsoever. Washing out never entered my mind. And being the best, that's what we do as being a perfectionist. So my answer is I was a perfectionist, so everything else fell into place.
So standards, right? I mean,
That's right.
You're either doing it at the absolute top of your game or you're not. And if you're not, then you're not you.
That's right.
Huh. Colonel Peterburs, are you a perfectionist as well?
Oh, I don't think so. All I'm trying to do, my whole experience in the military and in my life has been do your best. That's what I used to tell my troops when I was commanders. I'd tell the troops to do their best. And that's all you can do. You got to put, you know.
Well, the only uniform that I've ever worn with any kind of regularity was in the Boy Scouts many years ago. And do your best was more or less tattooed on our foreheads. That was the rule, you know. It's I mean, success is one thing, survival is obviously the goal, but doing your best along the way. Troy, I don't know if that's what you were expecting to hear, but that makes sense to me.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Let's do another question back to back, going down to let's see, where do I have? How about Miami University? We've got Cadet Jack BEERMAN. Jack, you hear me?
Yes, sir, I do.
You've got a question. Fire away.
Yes, sir. Well, first of all, good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for your time today. And most importantly, Colonel Peterburs and Lieutenant Colonel Harvey, thank you for your service. You've really inspired a lot of people, millions across the world, and especially the cadets that are here with you today. My question for you today is, for those that are serving in our armed forces today, facing adversity, what advice would you like to bestow on them as they serve throughout the military?
Well, I think I just answered that. You do your best. And it depends upon what the first field you're in. If you're a fighter pilot, you better be a badass. You know, you can't be thinking about all. You have to have the training. The main thing is have the training and to where things come natural. The correct way of doing things come natural. So you don't have to think about it. As we were talking before, you know, you're making this decision in milliseconds. Well, if you're going to go through step by step, the outcome's not going to be very well. Unless you know what you're going to do, unless you've been trained and it becomes part of your life, just like flying an aircraft, flying a P-51 becomes a part of your body, the wings or your arms, and you know, you don't even think about what you do. And I still drive a stick shift, and I don't even think about the shifting. You know, it just happens naturally. And that's what you should strive for, to be trained to where what you're doing doesn't require any thought. It just becomes instinct, and it happens.
Is that what happened? And I'm going to ask this to both of you, because I think a lot of people will remember this a lot more readily than they will remember the end of World War II. But when Sullenberger landed that plane in the Hudson, you guys both must have watched that with extreme interest. What do you reckon went through his mind, Lieutenant Colonel, that allowed him to make that decision the way he did?
Well, he knew he couldn't get back to the air base. So the only thing left was to put it in the river. And he did a good job on that, because when those engines hit that water, it's going to do this. And the tail's going to come up and the nose is going to go down. But everything worked out perfectly for him. So he made the right decision.
It worked out pretty good for everybody behind him, too.
Yeah.
I mean, Colonel, when you watched that footage, even though it wasn't a combat scenario at all, it must have felt like one to you.
Well, yeah, it just exhibited the fact. I'm sure he wasn't. It just became what he had to do. He knew he had to do. His training, all of his training and his experience, all whelmed up in this one situation, and he just did. He just did it because it was the correct thing to do, and through his training, his knowledge, and everything else. It just happened. And I'm sure that's, I've never talked to him, but I'll bet that he'll come up with the same answer. It just happened because he had the experience and the training and the knowledge that this is the only way you can survive.
It just seems to me, Lieutenant Colonel, if there's a secret recipe for confidence and competence, that's it. You know, it's not just enough to do your best, and it's not just enough to be a perfectionist, but you have to truly master the skill in order to apply it in a way that becomes second nature.
Yes, that's for sure. And in our training, our program was designed for our failure. And the white pilots had to demonstrate that they could get the aircraft off the ground and back on safely, where we had to do everything perfect. And but it paid off. Plus, all of us strive to be the best. Each one of us did. And when you get all these bests together, you've got quite a group. Now, who was the best? It all depends on who's telling the story.
Well, right now, sir, you're the one telling the story, and I want to ask you something. I don't remember where I read it, but with regard to that trophy, regard to that first Top Gun victory, you gave credit to the ground crew in a way that was in equal measure. Now, my question is this. A couple of years ago, I did a story over at Fort McConnell. You know, I worked with the tank rats, those guys that replaced the fuel cells in the KC-135R, right, the Stratotanker. And, you know, nobody ever talks about these guys. And so I went there with my crew, and they let me crawl up into the wing, and it was absolutely miserable, and they were so proud of what they did. And, you know, I hadn't thought about those guys in a while until I read in your bio that you went out of your way to make sure the ground crew was celebrated. First of all, good for you for doing that. And did they ever return the favor, right? Was that appreciated at the time?
Oh, yes, they do a good job all the time. That's their appreciation in the job that they do.
So obviously you couldn't do your job without them.
Oh, no, you can't. Because without them, you don't get off the ground.
What was your ground crew like, Colonel? I mean, you probably had lots of different men servicing your aircraft over the years. Did you get to know them all?
No, I did not get to know them all, but they were very good. I was fortunate. And every assignment I had throughout the Air Force, I had no problems whatsoever. And I got into squadrons where the maintenance was excellent. So, no problems.
Colonel Peterburs, your relationship with the ground crews over the years, there must have been, when you think of all of the support that allowed you to fly your missions, I mean, it's overwhelming, isn't it?
Well,
It is. It
yes,
is.
it is. But basically, you're a team. You know, it's not so much. The ground crew is the team with you, and we're all equal, and we all do the job. We know what the mission is, and we're all just, set up or mentally attuned to accomplishing that mission. And as with any group of people who are formed a team, a football team, a baseball team, whatever, you're supporting each other. You're trying to accomplish. You have an objective, and you're out to achieve that objective.
I think of it like a pit crew, you know, except nobody's shooting at you.
It's good analogy.
It was okay. It wasn't great. We've got two more guys with two more questions. The next one on my list is Devon Ford, and I think, Devon, you're down in Virginia Tech. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Out in Blacksburg, Virginia.
Everything good down there?
Yes, sir. Everything's been pretty good, especially at Virginia Tech. We've been taking a lot of really good safety mitigations to carry on the semester, so it's been pretty good.
What a strange time you're living in, my friend.
Yes, sir. I just thank you for introducing myself, Mr. Mike Rowe, and I appreciate Colonel Peterburs and Lieutenant Colonel Harvey for coming out and talking to us. But my question is for Colonel Peterburs. And so during your time in World War II, when you were only 19, you encountered your first German B-17 aircraft while escorting bomber missions. What was your mindset going in, and how were you able to make precise and accurate decisions with all the stress and adrenaline that was going on during this time?
You mentioned I was 19, 20 years old. Okay, I had fantastic training up until that time. So I knew my job, I knew what was, and it was an adventure to me. You went up and you actually was looking for action. In my case, there was no fear. It was just pure excitement the whole time. And take a 19-year-old today and give him a Harley and say, go ahead and drive that Harley, and he'll really love it. Give a 19-year-old a P-51 with 650 caliber machine guns and a 2,000 horsepower engine, and say, go ahead and do your thing. And you go and do your thing. Young guys must know, unless things have changed a lot, that you're going to live forever. It's the other guy that's going to get it. So I never had that sort of apprehension or so on. It was just a fantastic job, and I had a mission to do, and we did it, and we did it well.
How do you balance, Devon mentioned adrenaline, and, when I think of, like, listening to your answer right now, you didn't use the word fun, but there's fun all over your face. You're talking about excitement. You're talking about adrenaline. You're talking about being 19 years old. You're talking about being on a mission. My question, to just kind of piggyback on that, is, did you feel the weight of the mission on your shoulders back then? Did you know in your 19-year-old adrenaline-filled mind what you were fighting for?
Well, we knew that I was I knew that when I joined and when I became, got into the service, but I was fighting. I mean, in fact, I was studying to be a priest before I got in, and I was in the seminary on December 7th, and I knew at that time I would leave the seminary and I'd go try to get into the Air Force and fly. So that part of it, I knew what I was fighting. At that time, when I was 18 years old, I knew what I'd die for. I'd die for my God, my family, and my country. And I believe that if you don't have something you're willing to die for, life is hardly worth it. If you don't believe in something strong enough that you're able to, I don't know what the purpose of life is. You have to believe in something. But anyway, that's my personal. A lot of people disagree with that, and that's me.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, it's so interesting to hear you say that, because today there's a different conversation going on with regard to living and safety, and not to get political at all. I understand the importance of a lockdown, and I understand the rationale to treat this virus with all possible seriousness. But Lieutenant Colonel, our colonel friend here just basically said that unless you're willing to live, or unless you're willing to die for something, the whole point of living becomes kind of upside down. So he enlisted. You, I think, were drafted in 42. Is that right?
43. I was drafted. I tried to enlist, and they said they weren't taking enlistments at that time. That was in January of 43.
You tried to enlist, and they said no, thank you, and then they drafted you.
3 months later.
So now you're in. You're in all the way up to your head. You're a perfectionist. So I guess my question is, when did you get to the point, or did you get to the point that Colonel Peterburs just described, where what you were doing was something worth dying for?
Well, I got to that point when I was accepted into the flying training program. But until that point, no, I was in the Army, took Army basic training at Fort Meade, Maryland, at Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, in 30 days. And then from there, they sent me to Jefferson, no. Anyway, they sent me to the Washington area to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, in the Army Air Corps Engineers, driving bulldozers, graders, carryalls. My mission was to go into the jungle, doze out an area, build an airfield for aircraft to land on. We used to go out and practice every day, and I said, no, this isn't for me. So I applied for cadet training, and I was accepted for the cadet training. There were 10 of us, 9 whites and myself. 2 of us passed. Then from there, I went to Biloxi, Mississippi for 30 more days of basic training, and from there to Tuskegee, and the rest is history.
You guys are really just, I mean, it's incredible. 2 very different stories, same war, and when I think about, we were talking about it before, but the war changed you. It must have changed you. It gave you a purpose. It gave you a mission. It gave you a job to do. And now, here we sit 75 years later. The country is trying to make sense of the situation in which it finds itself. And I'm trying to make sense of the extraordinary character that was required of both of you guys 75 years ago. Young men asked to do amazing things. And it's so cool to sit here today with both of you and have these military students, having a chance to pick your brain, and me having a chance just to try and connect some dots, because, Colonel, people today are desperate to make sense out of this time that we're living in. And what you just said before, you really took it to a new level. Here I am asking you to describe if you understood what you were fighting for, and you very gently corrected me by saying, no, it was really a question of understanding what I was willing to die for. And somehow or another, we got to get that on a T-shirt, because there's a lot of truth in that.
Thank you.
Wasn't much of a question, but I just felt like I needed to say it. Vincent, on the other hand, is also down in Virginia Tech. I can't even read my own writing, Vincent. What's your last name, Stevens?
Yes, Mike, it is.
Vincent Stevens has a question for you, gentlemen, and here it is.
Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us today. As was mentioned earlier, we've certainly been inspired by the stories that you've shared with us here. So in a time where social distancing and, I guess, tactical separation, you could say, are what is so prevalent, the importance of maintaining close bonds, in my opinion, is more prevalent now than ever. So going off of that, one tenet that both, all of our Air Forces value, as you're both certainly aware, is this idea of a wingman, someone who literally flies off your wingtip and is always there for you should you need him or her, and somebody that lives by this idea that a wingman never leaves each other behind. So with that background, throughout both of your time in combat, do you have a story about a wingman? And, if so, which wingman left the most profound mark on your lives and why?
Well, my wingman hung in there. He was always with me. And what else can I say? He was there at all times. No matter what I did, he was there. And we both came back, no problems. Maybe a few bullet holes, but that was it. That was it. I only had one close call in Korea, and that was on takeoff. The F-80 had two 500-pound bombs. Got off the ground, I got this terrific vibration. I called the tower and told them I had to make a landing. I had this vibration. I'd come back around on the downwind leg, the base and final. They cleared me. I came back and landed. And what had happened, in a jet engine, you have a series of blades together, and they rotate. Each blade is an airfoil. And behind it is another row of these little blades that are airfoils, but they're stationary. They're called stator blades. And then those on the rotor are called rotor blades. And when you lose a rotor blade, it goes out the tail of the aircraft. Well, my blade that I lost didn't go out the tail. It dropped down between the rotor and the stator and wiped out all my stator blades. So therefore, I didn't have much push, but I had enough push to get me back around and on the ground again. So I could thank the good Lord for that.
Was your wingman there on that day too?
No, he was taking off after me, and he continued on the mission. All the other three continued on the mission. I landed. They knew what to do. No problem.
Vincent, I think, it's a great answer when you think of it in terms of the mission. The wingman's there for you, but the mission is there for both of you, and duty calls. Colonel, his question too reminds me, and I'm sure everybody on the screen knows the quote. It was Shakespeare, right? Henry V, we few, we happy few. He who sheds his blood with me will be my brother. The band of brothers, that's the sentiment I think Vincent is talking about. And you alluded to it earlier, Colonel. It's real, isn't it?
In my experiences during World War I, you were the wingman. I remember when I first started my first 15, 20 missions, I was about about 15 missions, I was constantly put as wingman to the group commander. I asked my flight leader one day, I said, how come I'm always flying wing to the group commander? He said, well, they like the way you perfect your six. I said, is there a promotion in it? He said, no. I said, well, I want to go. I appreciate their sentiments, but you know, I need to get promoted here. So he said, okay, and I guess he put it up light, and so I was made element leader, and then made a first lieutenant. So, and now, as far as you had a wingman every mission. It was a different wingman. I mean, you didn't have a wingman and you performed. I was element leader, I was flight leader, I was the wingman. So you switch positions all the time. It's not, I don't know, maybe that's the way it is now, that you do have a sort of a permanent wingman. There was no such thing back then. You just expected that the guy, you know, you knew that the guy that was your wingman was going to be looking after your six. And that's basically it.
I know a lot of words, but I don't really know how to group them up to express my sincere appreciation for your service, for all that you've done and all that you continue to do. I mean, we can't overstate it. And I know I speak for the students who ask their questions as well. The opportunity to be able to come back to you guys here in your ninth decade, and talk to you and be with you and spend time and just get some perspective from you on these crazy times that we're living now. It's just invaluable to me. So I want to thank you both for making time for us today. We're truly grateful. On behalf of the Veterans Center and the 75th commemoration, there really is nothing else to say but thank you sincerely on behalf of a grateful nation.